What's up, guys? How's it going? Today's video is packed with crazy updates and some wild news. A lot of interesting stuff is happening, and there are some important signs showing up now that the Arnold Classic is getting closer and closer. So no stalling and no wasted time. Let's jump straight into what really matters, because there's a lot of good stuff to break down and talk about today. But before we really get going, let me ask you something real quick. Have you been enjoying this news and updates format for bodybuilding videos? If you have, drop a comment below, because that helps a lot when it comes to deciding the future direction of the channel. Alright, let's get into it. The first update today is about the beast himself, Hottie Chupan, and it's one of those updates that grabs your attention instantly. This week, he posted a short video, and what we see is a physique that almost doesn't look real. The size, density, and muscle maturity are on another level, raising the possibility that this could be one of the best versions of Hadi we've ever seen. But this update doesn't exist in a vacuum. While his physique is blowing people away worldwide, Hadi is dealing with a very delicate situation outside the stage. Back home, the atmosphere has shifted hard. Gyms are taking down posters, and part of the population is openly rejecting him. At the same time, outside of Iran, especially among international athletes and fans, the support is still strong. That contrast between global recognition and local pressure is intense. This clash of realities brings up a tough question. Some people believe Hadi's silence comes from fear for his own safety and for his family. Others argue that regular people, with families just as vulnerable, are still out in the streets protesting. It's a complicated situation with no easy answers, and it adds an enormous emotional weight to any athlete's preparation. From a purely physical standpoint, his shape is almost impossible to argue against in terms of impact. Chest, arms, back, and overall density put Hadi a step above most of the competition. That said, there's one detail that hasn't gone unnoticed. The delts look extremely overblown, with an artificial appearance that raises suspicions of sight enhancement oil use, something that can definitely lead to penalties from the judges. And that's exactly where the big dilemma lies. If the judges overlook that issue, Hadi instantly becomes the man to beat at the Arnold Classic, even with his shorter height and a few minor structural flaws. What's truly impressive is seeing how, under massive personal and social pressure, he's still able to present such a dominant physique. It reinforces the idea that some athletes don't just survive extreme stress, they actually become more dangerous because of it. Now let's talk about Wesley Vissers, who posted a video this week with one important caveat. There's a heavy filter on the footage, which makes it hard to accurately judge conditioning. Even so, one thing stands out almost immediately, and it cuts right through the filter: his legs. Throughout his career, this has always been the most fragile point of Wesley's physique. As a taller athlete, leg development never quite matched his arms, shoulders, and upper body, creating a clear imbalance. That's not uncommon for taller bodybuilders, but in his case, it's always been the main factor holding him back from taking a bigger competitive leap. Even without deep cuts, clear separation, or visible definition, the width and overall size of his legs look noticeably bigger. The relationship between the quads, adductors, and shoulder line suggests real muscle gain, not just a temporary pump or a lucky camera angle. That tells us something important about this phase of his career. Time away from competition clearly wasn't just about rest or maintenance. Everything points to Wesley being extremely strategic, putting his energy exactly where it was needed the most. Still, the video keeps expectations grounded. Without peak conditioning, any analysis is incomplete. The real test only happens on stage, under full lighting, max definition, and side-by-side comparisons with other athletes. But for the first time in a long while, there's a solid reason to pay closer attention to Wesley Vissers and have genuine expectations about what he might bring. Nick Walker is entering this phase of the season in a situation unlike anything he's experienced before. For the first time in a long while, he's prepping without a full-time coach, taking complete control over every decision related to his physique. That alone completely changes what we can expect from him. This decision didn't come out of nowhere. Over the past few years, Nick has gone through some rocky experiences with coaches, conflicts, frustration with results, and even public criticism involving methods and strategies. More than once, it was clear he wasn't fully comfortable with the direction he was going, even when the results were still competitive. Because of that, The most logical move now seems to be a return to his roots. All signs point to Nick leaning into a more old-school approach, very similar to the period when he worked with Matt Jansen. That was the phase when he presented some of the strongest versions of his physique, both at the Arnold Classic and at the 2022 Olympia, combining brutal size with a high level of conditioning. Even without many official updates, small training clips and occasional images suggest that something solid is being built. The physique looks dense and powerful, with a simpler prep approach. No overcomplicating the process or trying to reinvent the wheel with last-minute, risky tweaks. The big question now is how Nick will perform completely on his own, without outside interference and without someone else sharing those critical decisions. That freedom might be exactly what he needed to line up conditioning, peak, and presentation. The expectation is pretty clear. Could this be a sharper, more consistent Nick Walker, closer than ever to his best version on stage? Switching gears, let's talk about Sam Sulek, who's showing up at this point in his prep in a very honest way. He's openly saying he's about 4 weeks out from the Arnold Classic, without trying to create hype narratives or confuse people with vague updates. Unlike many athletes, he's showing exactly where he's at. No fake conditioning, no unrealistic version of his physique. Visually, his shape already looks very close to stage ready. There aren't drastic changes from one update to the next, and that's not a bad thing at all. If anything, it shows that Sam hit the required level early and now just needs to manage the process smartly, avoiding the classic mistakes that happen in the final stretch. From here on out, the focus shifts away from fat loss and toward preservation, keeping muscle fullness, holding size, and avoiding unnecessary wear and tear become the priorities. Any adjustments now are small and precise, almost surgical, because the physique is already ready to compete. Now let's literally step on the scale, because Samson Dauda showed up in a recent video with an impact that's almost impossible to ignore. During a guest posing appearance, he weighed in at around 357 pounds, about 162 kilograms, a number that's already insane on its own, but becomes even more shocking when you see him standing next to a 212 athlete. The size difference is so extreme, it almost looks unreal. A physique like that naturally raises health questions. Still, the context matters. Bodybuilding has always been built on athletes pushing the human body to its limits. Names like Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler, and Phil Heath are remembered precisely because they broke previous standards, and Samson looks like he's following that same path. What's most impressive is that this isn't just a big physique. It might be the biggest and freakiest version of Samson we've ever seen. Areas that were once considered weaker points, especially his back, now look far denser and more dominant, even deep into the off-season, with body fat and water still clearly present. Another interesting detail is the contrast in visibility. While the current Mr. Olympia, Derek Lunsford, has taken a more reserved approach, Samson is everywhere, posting updates, training clips, guest posings, and public content. Even though this shouldn't, and technically can't, affect judging on contest day, it's impossible to ignore the real-world impact. Samson is grabbing attention, dominating conversations, and building a powerful narrative around his name. James Hollingshead showed up recently in a video with a physique that, at first glance, hits hard because of its sheer size. Sitting close to 300 pounds, around 136 kilograms, he stands out for overall mass, but a direct comparison with Samson Dauda brings up an unavoidable question. Even though they're similar in height, the difference in weight and visual impact between the two is massive, highlighting just how much structure and density really matter. Strength has never been an issue for James. His physique clearly reflects someone who built muscle by moving extreme weights, almost like a powerlifter. That translates into thick, heavy muscle that looks dominant and intimidating in the off-season. But when the setting shifts to the stage, those same traits can start working against him. The video highlights issues that have shown up repeatedly over the years. A wider waist hurts the overall look, especially when paired with shoulders and arms that don't deliver the same level of impact. On top of that, the lack of deep cuts and muscle separation takes away from the quality of the physique once it's under harsh lighting and direct comparison. That lack of refinement explains why James often looks much better in gym footage or locker room shots than he does on stage, when the standards rise and details become the deciding factor. Joe Palasios is the perfect way to close out the video because he represents the absolute extreme of modern bodybuilding. This isn't about classic aesthetics, clean lines, or visual flow. What defines Joe is mass, density, and raw impact, to the point where first-time viewers are often caught completely off guard. Even with a naturally wide waist, something structural and impossible to change, the amount of muscle he carries almost shockingly makes up for it. Considering his shorter height, the level of muscle packed onto his frame is borderline absurd, giving him a presence that dominates any room, even offstage. When compared to Nick Walker, Joe is often described as even more extreme in the off-season. His body looks inflated with density from every angle, but it's his back that really steals the show. The thickness, width, and depth of his lats make him one of the most visually overwhelming physiques in the sport today, something rare even among elite competitors. Joe will never be a pretty lines or classic structure bodybuilder. Still, there's room for visual improvement. Even bigger shoulders could help create a more aggressive V-taper, balancing out his torso and, as much as possible, reducing the visual impact of his wide waist. That's why the expectations around Joe Palasios are so high. He's the kind of athlete that sparks curiosity, debate, and even shock. Seeing that physique under stage lights, fully conditioned, lined up against the best in the world, especially at a future Mr. Olympia, is something a lot of people are already waiting for. So, guys, what did you think of today's episode? I really want to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed it, drop a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Thanks a lot.